Let me get those house lights. There it is. Hey, he is risen. If you are a visitor with us, or maybe you've been watching online, or you're visiting from another location, this might be your first Easter with us at all. I want you to know we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus together as a family every Sunday, and we live in the power of that resurrection each and every day of our lives. But this day, I knew exactly what I was going to preach on. Sometimes you have your preaching chart where you say, I wonder what verses we're going to look at. But on this day, God says, everybody's going to be talking about the same thing, the most important thing, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We're going to look at what the resurrected Jesus means today, and what it means for us tomorrow, and what his life means for us each and every day as we live this thing called life. Everybody say life. Yes. So we're going to look at the last few days of Jesus' ministry here on earth, and we're going to see how he is the source of life first, and how if he is the source of life, that means that changes how we see death. And then lastly, we're going to see how that means we show life to everybody around us. So, if you haven't read the beginning of the Bible, you know that the source of life comes from above, comes from God. Genesis, first couple of chapters, he creates everything. And he breathes the breath of life into mankind. And he makes us a living being so that he can be in a relationship with us. What did we bring to the equation? God brought life, and we brought sin and death very quickly in the story. So God had to enter into our death, enter into our world, so that he could bring about life eternal for us. And on Friday, followers from around the world celebrated that sacrifice. We sang about it this morning, the work that was finished on the cross. And that's where we pick up our first verse in the book of Matthew. And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit, and at that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Now, the temple curtain was there for a very good reason, because God is perfect and he is holy, and in our imperfection, we could not be in his presence. So that curtain was there for our benefit. And if you're a parent or ever have been a parent, you know that there are times you do things for your kids to protect them. Why do I have this command from my parent? Trust me, it's for your protection. There was the Holy of Holies beyond that curtain, where only one man could go in once a year to make a sacrifice for all the people. Anybody who went in there all lackadaisical or willy-nilly or not respecting God and his holiness had only themselves to blame for the consequences of that action. That curtain was needed. We needed that curtain because it was the protection of God when the power of God was among the people of God, when we had the problem of our own sin. And God's perfection was too much for us to handle in our imperfection. So God is the one who is protecting us, and he says it's for your protection that this curtain is here. In the Old Testament, there was a book called Exodus. Perhaps you remember that one. It's got Moses and the crossing of the Red Sea and the Egyptians and the plagues. It's very famous, a lot of movies about it. But after God freed the Israelites, passed them through the Red Sea, he took them to a mountain. And in his power and in his thunder and lightning and smoke, he ascended to the mountaintop, descended to the mountaintop, and the people of Israel were like, Moses, you got to go up there, man. Like, we can't do it. We can't even approach him. They couldn't get on the mountain because of their imperfection. And so Moses went up on a mountain to encounter God and his power for the benefit of the people. Do you see Jesus in this story? Do you see how he is a better Moses? Because Moses came down and he said, here's the law. Here's the veil. These are the rules. Because even though he is here among us in his power, there still is a degree of separation. But whenever Jesus went up on a mountain to encounter the power and the perfection of God, he didn't come down and say, we need another curtain. Whenever he came off of that mountain, the curtain was torn in two from top to bottom. And that's no small curtain. God's holiness was the reason for the curtain, and Jesus' death is the reason for that curtain's removal. And it tore from the top to the bottom. That's very important. It's a very important detail, because if it was torn from the bottom up, that would be mankind trying to get our way back to God. It would be born of our rebellion. But since it was from the top down, that means it's our restoration. that we get to come back to God in a powerful relationship. So the source of life is always from the top down, from above, for our benefit. And that idea of the source of life being from the top down doesn't just stop at the crucifixion of Jesus. Whenever we get to the resurrection, Matthew goes on to tell us that they buried Jesus' body and then they sealed the tomb with an official Roman seal. You see, the Jewish leaders said, we think that this guy, he's so mischievous, even though that he's dead. We want to make sure that that tomb is sealed. So they went to Pilate and they said, we need extra security. We need extra security for this guy and his followers. And this is what Pilate told them. Take a guard. Go make the tomb as secure as you know how. And so they went and made the tomb secure by placing a seal on the stone and posting a guard. Now that seal was probably a malleable, like clay, that they could put the insignia, the imperial signal on there with a rope that said, you cannot go past this point. That was as secure as the world knew how to try to keep Jesus in the tomb. As secure as you know how. And if that sentence doesn't define the human condition, what do we do with our lives? We try to make our lives as secure as we know how. We try to make our homes as secure as we know how. Last night when I was letting my dog out, I saw that I had a sticker that said protected by ADT. I don't know when that sticker was put there. I don't have ADT. Don't tell anybody. But somebody at some point said, I need to make this house as secure as I know how. We lock our doors. We try to surround our lives with things that we enjoy, that we think will give us comfort, things that will keep us secure in some way. And all of the world is trying to do something to make their lives as secure as they know how. But I'm glad that Jesus has a different definition of security for my life. I'm glad that he says, I'm going to make your life as secure as I know how. And how I secure a life is by coming out of that tomb, by breaking that seal. God's definition of what it means for you to have a secure life is a better one than anything we could come up with. Now, if anybody were to break that seal under the threat of all of the might and power of Rome, they would face the wrath of the empire. But Jesus took the wrath of God, and so because he did, that seal was broken, never to be rebound again. The wrath of the empire tried to keep that tomb closed. But the love of God and the life of God broke that tomb wide open. But where was the source of the breaking of this seal? Where was the source of this removal of this obstacle? It wasn't from the outside. It wasn't from down here. The disciples didn't come and say, we've got to go overtake the Roman guards. No, they were locked in their doors. For fear of the Jews, they were trying to make themselves as secure as they knew how. But we read in Matthew chapter 28, there was a violent earthquake, for the angel of the Lord came. Go ahead and say it. The source of life is from where? It's from above. From top to bottom. The angel came down from heaven, and going to the tomb, he rolled back the stone and sat on it. The seal was broken because of what came down from above, the power of God. That tomb wasn't open because of an earthly power from the outside, but because the life of heaven was inside, and you can't keep the life of heaven down. Now, I hope you noticed what we just did there. Whenever we talked about the crucifixion and the burial, we were in Matthew chapter 27. What's that say right there? Matthew chapter 28. Now, I know that the chapter and verses were put in your Bible many years later by a monk who was like, it'd be easier if we could find our way through these stories. But I think that today some of us may still be trying to live in a Matthew chapter 27 world. We may still be trying to think, maybe there's no other chapter. Maybe this is where it ends. Maybe death is the end of everything, and you're living in Matthew chapter 27, but Matthew has a chapter 28. And did you know that there's another chapter in Mark? Did you know that there's another chapter in Luke? And you can have another chapter today if you want it. You may be living at a time period where it feels like there's so much death around you, and you may say, is this what life is? I think I need a new chapter. And I invite you today to turn the page into the resurrection of Jesus Christ and experience the life that comes down from above and can change your life from the inside out the way he came out of that tomb. Do you need a new life? I know the source That stone grave may have belonged to a man named Joseph, but that soul grave had my name on it. And Jesus entered a tomb that didn't have his name on it, and he entered a punishment that definitely had my name on it. And that source of life came from the top down to raise me up and bring me out of death into a new chapter of life. So since the source of life is from above, that then changes how we see death. After the news of the resurrection, John and Peter went to the tomb, and it was just like the women had seen it. John got there first. He made sure that he said that in his recording. And then we see that he bent over and looked at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb, because of course Peter would do something like that. Just go straight in, and look, he sees the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. And the cloth was still lying in its place, apart from the linen. I love that they left the linen strips. Obviously, Jesus left them because he didn't need them anymore. He's alive forevermore. There's no need for grave clothes if you're never going to die again. But then Peter and John, and they all look at it, and they look at the strips of linen, and they leave them there. That's a very powerful little moment that leaves evidence for the resurrection. Jesus didn't need the grave clothes, but neither did his followers anymore. You know, somebody didn't manage to rob that grave because the most valuable thing that would have been taken would have been the 75 pounds of spices that they put on his body, or the linen that they used. All of that stuff was very expensive, paid for by a rich and powerful man to show Jesus honor. And there it all is, there in the tomb, and they left it. Because the most valuable part of the resurrection wasn't the linen, it wasn't the spices, it was the risen body of Jesus, and he wasn't there anymore. And you may think, oh, surely people wouldn't do that. They wouldn't steal from dead bodies to make a little money. Have you ever studied history? That's what people do. And if you see humanity today, I came across this advertisement that cracked me up. This is an advertisement for a gently used casket. If you can't read that, don't worry, I'm going to read it to you. Because it's gold. Was only in the ground for 18 months. Decided to go a different route. I'll let you fill in that one. Oh, I mean, of course you decided to go a different route if you woke up after an 18-month coma. I would too. Minor wear and tear. From which side? Are we talking like the outside, the inside? Where's the wear and tear? I need to know. Okay? We'll trade for bike parts. Price is non-negotiable. I know what I have. So you're not taking a coupon on a used casket? Okay, great. These are $10,000 new, and I love how it goes on with, for those asking, yeah, what did you think was going to happen when you put this on Facebook? Not that it's anyone's business. You made it my business, buddy. It took a while to locate the closest living relative who informed us the deceased's wishes were to be cremated and scattered into the ocean. You can't tell me people don't try to make a little money by selling used burial goods. Grave robbers are real. The only difference between a grave robber and an archaeologist is a few thousand years. And you know, when archaeologists find bodies, they keep finding bodies and bodies and bodies, and they say all of the most valuable stuff, all the decorations, the jewelry, all of the stuff that they probably buried them with was taken because that was the most valuable thing. But when you look at the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the most important thing wasn't the spices, it wasn't the expensive burial cloth. They weren't trying to, the disciples didn't say, well, now let's grab the spices because we can resell them on the black market. They didn't do any of that. They said the most valuable part of the resurrection isn't in this tomb anymore. The most valuable part of the resurrection walked out. And so we see death for how it is. It stays in that tomb. It does not leave with Jesus. Instead, with a new life, we get to walk out with him. So do not settle for discount death spice. It's like the worst of all the Spice Girls. Don't settle. Don't settle for the stuff that stays in the tomb. Walk out with Jesus with a brand new life. Those spices were useful on Saturday, but they were worthless on Sunday. And I'm sure that in this room, there are a lot of people that have a lot of Saturday situations going on. There's a lot of Saturday happening that floods our Monday and our Tuesday and our Wednesday and our Thursday and our Friday. It was actually this time last year. Many of you know this. It was this time before Easter of last year that my wife got a cancer diagnosis. And I had to preach on the resurrection of Lazarus and Jesus saying resurrection from the dead, when we had a diagnosis, but we didn't have a prognosis. And I said, what does this mean? And what that means is, and I was wrestling with this on a Saturday, I said, I don't have a prognosis, God. And he says, when I came out of that tomb, I gave you a prognosis. Alive forevermore. And I had to preach on the resurrection of the dead. And I say had to, not because I felt like I needed to punch a clock, but because it's a fire in my bones shut up that I cannot contain. He is alive, and that changes everything about our lives. This has been a year where Saturdays have tried to take me. But I walked out with Jesus on a Sunday. And I'm not going to let any Saturday try to trap me and say, this is where you belong. There are things in here that can take your life that are valuable. If I look in that tomb, I'm only going to look in the tomb to realize that Jesus isn't there, and I'm going to go wherever he is. I'm not going to stay in a Saturday. I'm going to celebrate on a Sunday. And I know you may have a lot of Saturday situations. Whenever you drop off your child at the custody exchange, whenever you go to tell that joke to somebody, a loved one, and then you see the empty chair and you're reminded again of what you've lost. Whenever you have procedures, surgeries, suffering, there are a lot of Saturdays in this room, but we only need one Sunday. And that Sunday, that source of life, changes how we see death, and it changes how we live our life. To live his powerful resurrection and to remember the truth. The good news, according to Luke, the gospel, tells us of 2 times that people needed to see the resurrection in order to remember the truth, and that changed how they showed the life of Jesus. The first is from the women at the tomb in Luke 24. It says, in their fright, because they had seen the men who were giving them the good news about Jesus that were blazing white. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, why do you look for the living among the dead? And I bet they said that with a little bit of sass. He is not here. He is risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee. The Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the 3rd day be raised again. And then, after they realized, oh, there's a resurrection, what do? They suddenly remembered his words. Can you remember his words today? Remember him saying, I love you. As you come to the resurrection today and you see the empty tomb and you know he is alive, will you remember everything that he has taught in the life that he lived? Jesus said this was going to happen. And if you look in the wrong place, you will miss him. Why do you look for the living among the dead? Why do you look for life among the things of this world that do not provide life? That's Saturday stuff. Why do you look for satisfaction, for meaning, for purpose, and anything other than resurrection? If you do that, you will miss the resurrected Jesus. And you will find yourself searching in all of the wrong places for something that cannot possibly satisfy. Life is not in those things. Life is in Jesus and Jesus alone. And if you are in him, you remember those words and you show life to other people. Nothing helps you remember to live his teachings than remembering his resurrection. And as you come to the tomb today and you see no body, remember, he said this was going to happen for your benefit and for mine, to change our lives forever. The second time Luke records a similar situation was when Jesus appeared to 2 on the road to a place called Emmaus. And they were dejected. They thought, we thought Jesus was the guy. And then Jesus comes along and says, friends, what are you talking about? Jesus knows. If you think Jesus isn't funny, I'm sorry, he's hilarious. What are you talking about? We thought Jesus was the Messiah. Really? Let's talk about that. And so as they're walking on the road, Jesus explains to them the scriptures, and they say, this guy's fascinating. Will you stay with us? Come to our house. We need to talk more. And Jesus says, no, I should probably keep going. There's other people that need to know what you know now. No, stay. Okay, fine, I'll stay with you. And then he breaks the bread, and suddenly they go, As he broke the bread, which we just did today, you think that whenever you open that bread and you take that and you see the broken body of Jesus, you're not supposed to remember his resurrection? You're supposed to see him. Then their eyes were open and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight, which is a baller move, just mic drop. And they asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road? I mean, when you think of the different things that make your heart on fire about being with Jesus, you would be like, I want to see like a miracle. But what was burning in their hearts was when he opened up the scriptures and they remembered his words. There is great power in seeing a resurrected Jesus, because then that changes everything that you remember about what he has said. And when we remember his words, we must live them. We know the source of life, which changes how we see death, which means that then we show life to everybody around us. Out of the overflow of your heart, Jesus says, your mouth will speak. Out of the overflow of your heart, your mind will think, your hands will act. And if your heart is full of the resurrected life of Jesus, you will speak and live as Jesus did. We need to speak life to one another. Proverbs says the tongue has the power of life and death. And Philippians tells us, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And then it goes on to say, and then you should put into practice what we have demonstrated. So when you think of something more lovely, more pure, more excellent, there's nothing greater than the resurrection. So when you think about the resurrection, it should change how you show life to the people around you. I like the way Dr. Tony Evans puts it. Jesus didn't say on the cross, I am finished. He said, it is finished, because he was just getting started. And I can't help but wonder today what Jesus wants to get started with us. What he wants to get started in you when you come to the source of life and change what you see about death, and suddenly you have no fear, and then you go out into the world and you show the life of Jesus. I wonder what Jesus could get started, because he started a church. And he started a church, and he doesn't want the church to stall. He wants the church to keep going. I want God to start something in us today. Genesis, that very first book, very famous book, it's the book that everybody gets through, and they read through the Bible in the year, and they get through Genesis. They're like, woo, I made it through one book. And then sometimes it falters. You still got time. If you want to get back on track, it's only April. You can get your through the Bible in a year back on. But Genesis, it ends with the death of a righteous man named Joseph. He had that coat of many colors. And then Deuteronomy, which is the end of the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. The first 5 books, very important in the Jewish faith. That book, Deuteronomy, ends with the death of Moses, another righteous man. And then the book of Joshua, it ends with the death of a righteous man named Joshua. Do you know how Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John end? They don't end with the death of a righteous man. It ends in the life of Jesus. The good news about Jesus ends with his life, and his life changes everything else. It changes how every other story in this room ends as well. Another way to say it is this: Easter tells us our new life starts now. We have a hope that starts now, and our next life is forever. Death was secured, as secure as the world knew how, for a few short days. But life is secured by God. Life is secured in only the way that God knows how. And today we have a simple invitation to enter into the source of life, to have a new life, to have a living hope, to know how everything ends for you. The life that God went through so much to offer for you and for me. The prayer team is going to be through those doors and in a room at the end of the hall to the right. And they're going to make their way there now. But maybe today you're still feeling that dividing curtain. You're still feeling that wall of separation because of your sin. You haven't decided to follow Jesus. Can I tell you, the water's, I got some gently used water back here. We had a baptism last week. You have a baptism this week. I could get used to weekly baptisms. I could get used to more than one baptism. And if somebody today needs to have that curtain torn from the top to bottom and let the healing of God take over and have the source of life flooded them today, we can do it. Maybe you keep coming to the tomb and looking at the linen and you think, maybe I should stay here in the Saturday. Maybe I should stay in my sorrow. Maybe you're looking for value among the perishing instead of looking for life among the living. And the invitation, if you want to go to the prayer and say, I just need help getting from Saturday into Sunday. Can you pray with me that I rejoice in what I believe and that I stop going back to that which would hold me down and I get raised up to new life in Christ? Walk out of Saturday and join us in a glorious Sunday. Maybe today you need to be buried, leave everything in the past, and have a new life that you start showing other people. You say, I've believed this for a long time, but sometimes I keep it to myself, and I'm done keeping it to myself because that first resurrection, it was declared, go tell them, go tell the disciples, go tell everybody, go tell the world. So if you have a power of a resurrection in your life and you're keeping it to yourself, that needs to change. Because if you know the source of life, you know that changes how we see death. And then we show life to everybody, everywhere we go, every day. Will you stand and pray with me? Father, we come to you this morning so thankful for your powerful resurrection, for the life that we have, that you offer, that you provide, that you, from the top down, you can change us from the inside out. Lord, for anybody here who may have tried to seal you out, to seal you in, to say, I don't want my life to change. I want everything to stay like it is on a Saturday. I want to try to keep you buried, Lord. Will you just break the seals of our hearts and in our minds and come down and resurrect us, tear us open so that you can flood our lives and let us live your glorious resurrection. And it's in Jesus' name we pray.